Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Ask the Officiant, hosted by yours truly, John Torino. The purpose of this broadcast, which will recur on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, is to answer your questions about your wedding. So if you have questions, if you're engaged, you're planning to be married, please do feel free to join us at https://zoom.us/j/799-344-5506. We can handle up to 20 people live, and I'd love to have you tune in and give me questions. So, since at the moment we don't have anybody signed in, I thought what I'd probably do is just broadcast some stuff for recording and kind of see if I could answer the kinds of questions that people ask. So let's start with, what kind of a ceremony should I have? I get this a lot, and I really, the answer is it depends. Are you religious? Are you not religious? Do you have a faith, for example, like Catholicism, where you desperately need to have a Catholic priest do it and you'd like to have a mass? Or are you more of a generic Christian who would like the ceremony to have something to do with God, but not necessarily be overly religious or specific to a particular religious sect or order? So, it really depends on what you want. And, there are a lot of variations to a ceremony as well. Some people like to have a sand ceremony. That's particularly popular when you have families, second marriages, and families being merged. Or if somebody would like a unity candle ceremony, but they want a ceremony on the beach, which is not very practical for the unity candle, then you can often use the sand ceremony in exchange. If you want to have extra readings, you should let your officiant know that. Most of us will certainly accommodate either generic readings or specific Bible verses, or perhaps, just have the officiant read the Bible verses that you want without having a guest reader do that. So, there's a lot of different ways you can do it, and there's no cast in concrete way you need to do it. Work with your officiant and sort out which kind of a ceremony you really want and all the elements so that you get exactly what you want. And the ceremony is as perfect as it can be for your wedding day. Another question I often hear is, what about standard versus custom vows? Well, it turns out that there are a lot of different kinds of standard vows, and you could actually, I always send a script with standard vows that people can edit, but you can often find sample scripts. If you just Google vows and Google scripts, even wedding scripts or ceremony scripts, you'll find all kinds of variations on the theme if you don't like the ones that, for example, I send out as standard. So the only things I would say about if you're going to write your own vows and your own custom vows, keep them fairly short. I've done one or two weddings where people had half a page to a page, and in one case even 2 pages of vows, which really it turned out to be a whole history of their relationship, and it just did not go over well with the guests. It just was way too long, way too complicated. And so I'd strongly recommend trying to keep the vows to something that won't take more than a minute or two to go through, or maybe 3 minutes. Typically, your officiant, your minister, will spoon feed you the vows so that you don't have to memorize them. So it would be like, I, groom, take you, bride, as my wedded wife. Then you repeat after me, and then to have and to hold, from this day forward, in richer or poorer, sickness and in health, and so on and so forth. So there's no need to memorize those vows. The officiant will spoon feed you those as you go through, and do it in small phrases so that You have time. You have time to remember those small phrases, and you won't forget a big long sentence or a big long set of vows. So feel free to customize the vows, but also remember that your guests probably don't want to hear the whole story of the relationship and what's happened. Take the advice of your officiant. We've done a lot of these things, and we know what works and we know what doesn't work. Another question is about rehearsals. Do I need a rehearsal or not? Well, the answer to this one is also, it depends. How big is your wedding? What kind of venue have you chosen? If you have a large bridal party, 5, 6, 7 bridesmaids and groomsmen, you may want to have a rehearsal to make sure that everybody knows where they're supposed to stand, when they're supposed to enter, where they're supposed to stand, how for example, the maid of honor and the groomsman, the best man, are usually closest to the couple, so that the maid of honor can hang on to the bride's bouquet once it's time to do the ring ceremony. The groomsman can, the best man will have the ring for the groom so that they don't get lost. And actually, I recommend, even if you have a ring bearer, oftentimes if the ring bearer is very young, it's better to have the ring bearer carry the box that the rings came in and make sure that the best man has got the rings in a pants pocket or a coat pocket so that you can make sure they don't get lost. If you do use a ring bearer and you do want to have the ring pillow put forth at exchange time, again, I've seen people tie double knots to tie the rings to the pillow, and it's really difficult to remove them. So make simple bow knots, or even tape them down with Scotch tape or other tape, and that way they're easy to remove, and you don't spend 3 or 4 minutes trying to uncouple the rings from the ring bearer's pillow. If you're going to do that, you want to make sure that everybody knows if they're going to be standing up, if they're going to be sitting down, particularly the ring bearer and the flower girl. And I often recommend, if you can afford it, to hire an event coordinator, and if not a full event coordinator or wedding planner, to at least get a hold of somebody who can be your day of coordinator. This is a person who makes sure everything runs smoothly. It takes a lot of the pressure off the bride in particular, and the groom to some extent as well, to making sure that things happen on time, to making sure that everybody's cranked into the right order of things, that the DJ and the processionals and the recessionals and other people know what their positions are, where they are, and when to start things and when to end things. So if you can do a complete wedding planner thing, that's great. If not, at least try to consider a day of coordinator, because they really do take a lot of pressure off. When it comes to how much does it cost, this could vary all over the map. If you want premarital counseling, if you want your officiant to perform the function of wedding planner, then you can be prepared to spend anywhere from $400 to $1,000 or maybe even more. If you want someone who will consult with you up front to make sure that he or she understands your needs and your wants and your desires for what kind of ceremony, what kind of vows, what kind of script, that can vary anywhere from $100 to $300 or $400, or even more for officiants who seem to believe that they can charge more based on the number of reviews they've gotten. I'm typically in $150 to $250 range, but don't base your decision on which officiant to hire based on price. That's the wrong thing to do. Base it on your rapport with the officiant. Base it on how well you feel you're going to work with the officiant. Base it on how the officiant will appear to your guests in terms of professionalism. So, talk with your officiant beforehand, either on the phone or via Skype or Zoom. And perhaps, especially I always recommend an in-person meeting. Once I've sent a draft script and draft vows, let's get together for a half an hour to an hour and go over the needs and the wants and the desires to make sure that the ceremony is going to go just the way you want it to go. And that way there are no slip-ups and no mistakes that can cause disaster for you. So, price-wise, anywhere probably from $100 to $1,000, but don't skimp on the officiant. He's probably the least expensive part of your wedding when you consider the venue and the food and the photographers and the DJ and all of that sort of stuff. Us guys and women who do these ceremonies for you are probably the least expensive part. So pick one that you believe you can work with, that understands your needs and wants and desires, and is committed to creating the kind of a ceremony and helping you with the kind of vows that you really want for your perfect day. Another one, when should I book my officiant? That's also a good question. I went to an event put on by weddingwire.com not too long ago that had a presentation in it where they'd done some research on who gets hired first. Typically, couples who have got things under control start planning at least 12 and sometimes 18 months in advance. And the first place they go and the first thing they hire is the venue, because you need to have the venue sorted out. And if you're going to pick a venue, not only do you want to take into account the season you want to get married, like don't plan an outside wedding in December, or sometimes don't plan it in August. You want to make sure that you have figured out how many guests you want before you decide on a venue. If you're only going to do 10 or 15 people, you certainly don't want a venue that normally serves 200, because it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. On the other hand, if you're going to serve or have 200 guests, you don't want to pick a place that can't handle that kind of quantity. Guests complain oftentimes in summertime weddings about no air conditioning and being out in the heat. So it's something also to think about. But your venue is going to be the most important part of what you pick first. Then you'll want to talk about catering. Sometimes the venues have their own captive catering. Sometimes you can hire your own or even bring it in from outside or homemade. But if you haven't chosen your venue first, it's very difficult to decide on caterers, photographers, disc jockeys. And oftentimes your venue can actually recommend those kind of people to help you out with that. So first the venue, then typically photographers, caterers, musicians, or disc jockeys. The statistics I saw from Wedding Wire show that we officiants are usually last to be hired or almost last to be hired, typically a month or two before the ceremony. I'm happy to do short notice events. To me, a month or 2 months is normally fine, except in summertime when it's prime wedding season from probably May, June, July, August, September, with July and August in the Portland, Vancouver area being the busiest. So the earlier you can book your officiant, the better off you're going to be. If you do it early, you have time to interview the officiants or at least chat with them to make sure they're going to be copacetic with you. And you'll have that checked off your list. You won't have to sit there and say, oh my God, I forgot somebody to marry me. So give some serious consideration to booking your officiant earlier rather than later. And when it comes to officiants, check the reviews. It's just like anything else in today's world. We always Google things. We always look for reviews before we decide what to do. I've been doing weddings for about 1.5 years, so I don't have a ton of reviews. First of all, getting reviews is sometimes difficult. Right after the wedding, everybody pops off for their honeymoon, and when they get back, if they have time to do a review for an officiant or anybody else, the DJ, the photographer, the venue, it's maybe buried in 2 weeks worth of email and difficult to get that. Sometimes it's really difficult to get photographs because most contracts with photographers say that they will send the photographs only to the bride and groom and not to somebody like myself who would just like 1 or 2 of the ceremony. And sometimes the bride and groom, again, have been so busy and are playing so much catch up that it's hard to get them. So don't necessarily see or select somebody based on how many reviews they had. I mean, as I say, I know officiants who have done 200-300 weddings and have hundreds of reviews, but that doesn't really tell you the quality of the work you're going to get for your particular ceremony. You want to base it on quality of the reviews, flexibility, professionalism, appearance, easy to work with, and that sort of thing. So don't necessarily look at the quantity of reviews, but look at the quality of reviews. That way you'll get somebody who really cares about you and really wants to make your day as perfect as possible. Now, the next question becomes, what have you forgotten to ask your officiant? There are a lot of questions that need to be answered, and those deal with, again, what kind of vows you want, is that person flexible to put in what you need, what kind of ceremony you want, so on and so forth. So again, I strongly recommend that upfront meeting and really making sure that you try to ask as many questions as possible. Now, I've put out some blog posts on my website at yourminister.org, and on that blog, one of the more recent posts is the ultimate list of checklists, and it's got like 14 checklists on it, which will help you ask the right questions of your venue, your photographer, your officiant, your caterer, your DJ. What do you need in your emergency kit for the day of the wedding? It's a huge list that I compiled from a bunch of folks on Facebook. I'm sorry, not on Facebook, on Pinterest, which I thought were kind of the best of the checklists. So I put that together as a blog post, and I invite you to check my blog. Again, it's at yourminister.org, and there's a blog page there where you can also, by the way, find reviews. You can find pricing information. That's something I always try to put on my website. I know how many people get frustrated when there's no pricing information when they look for a product or a service. So I've put that out there in basically packages of simple ceremony plus consultation, if you need a rehearsal, if you're farther than 25 miles from me, and so on and so forth. So check the website at yourminister.org and check the blog because it's got some interesting stuff. Things you don't want to forget are the marriage license. In Oregon, there's a 3-day waiting period. So if you want to get married on a Friday, you need to have your license issued by Tuesday. You can pay extra in Oregon in most counties to have that waiting list waived, but in Washington, you cannot. You have that mandatory 3-day waiting period, and the minister or officiant cannot marry you legally. It is possible sometimes to do a kind of a ersatz ceremonial ceremony, and then later on, a day or two later, if you've been too late getting the license, to hold a private ceremony. But I certainly don't recommend doing that. So make sure you get marriage licenses are good for 60 days. So get them 2 or 3 or 4 weeks in advance, and make sure you bring the marriage license to the wedding. I've had 1 or 2 situations where the wedding license and the wedding certificate got left in the hotel room or got left at home. It's been an extra trip, and it's, just not fun. So again, if you have a day of coordinator, or if you have a groom, a best man or maid of honor who can be entrusted to bring that paperwork, please make sure you bring the paperwork. So get the marriage license early. Check the blog for this list of checklists, which has got so much stuff in it that it may overwhelm you, but try not to get too panicked about it. What else should you know? Let's see what else you should know. First of all, let's see. The chances of having a good day are very high, particularly the more planning you've done. If you're a last-minute person, things could go wrong, and anything that could go wrong will go wrong, like Murphy's Law says. But if you plan early, if you book your vendors early, and you communicate with your vendors, and they communicate with each other, you should have a smooth ceremony. One of the things that I've seen happen quite often is that ceremonies start late. Now, if a ceremony starts 10, 15 minutes late, that's almost normal. It's almost expected. But I have been to a couple, I've officiated a couple where one time the bride was 45 minutes late, and one time actually an hour and a half late. And the guests were extremely upset. It's so rude to do something like that. And there really is no excuse for it. If you get started in the morning to get yourself ready and get all the makeup done and get the bridal party's makeup done and make sure everybody's dressed, and you have already hired and talked with your vendors, there's no excuse for being more than that 5 or 10 or 15 minutes late. So be careful about that and be mindful of the burden that being late puts on your vendors and particularly on your guests. I mean, I've done summer weddings at 95 degrees. It's an outside wedding, and somebody's 45 minutes late, and everybody's wilted and very unhappy by the time the ceremony begins. So try to make sure that you plan your day to make sure that you are on time. Everybody, including you, will be much happier. Don't worry about having a few glitches or a few mistakes in reciting the vows or putting the rings on and stuff like that. What people remember most is the bride coming down the aisle, entering to either Here Comes the Bride or whatever song you may choose, and the kiss. Everybody will remember the kiss. And most of the stuff that goes in between during the actual ceremony itself, if you laugh at something, if you cry at something, if you flub something, that's not going to be remembered. And if it is, it's going to be funny. They'll remember the bride coming in, they'll remember the kiss, and they'll remember the presentation by the officiant of the married couple for the first time. So, as stressful as these things can be, try very hard not to stress out, not to become a bridezilla, if you will. I've been lucky enough that I haven't had any bridezillas, just some late starts. But anyway, all kinds of things that you can do to ease your process, but I strongly recommend early planning. It looks like we didn't get anybody else joining us or joining me tonight on this little broadcast. I do plan to do it in future weeks on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Pacific time. And I really would love to have some people join us. Just Zoom.us is the platform. It's very easy to get hooked up to. It's very easy to join a meeting. The links are on the advertisements that I put out. And I really would like to answer your questions about your ceremony and how do you make that ceremony happen your way. So please do tune in next Tuesday and let's see if we can answer your questions. In the meantime, I'm John Torino. I'm a wedding officiant for Northwest Oregon, Southwest Washington, and beyond if travel is not too big an issue. You can find me at yourminister.org. You can email me at johnturino, JONTURINO.com at gmail.com, or you can call me at area code 503-877-4609, and I'll be happy to chat with you, happy to answer your questions, and happy if you decide to choose me as your officiant, because I'd love to marry you. Thanks very much.